Here are 3 true scary stories from Reddit. The links to the stories are in the description below. Enjoy. Number 1. This is my first post. I'm 30 now and not the greatest of storytellers, so please bear with me. I grew up very poor with my teenage mother and didn't meet my father until I was 20. When I was 14, I met a guy named James who was 17 and we dated for 5 years. James was a big-time drug dealer and my family knew this. At the time, I found that thrilling and cool. I made some pretty bad choices as a young lady. Our relationship was your typical abusive one. He would cheat on me a lot and then physically, mentally, and emotionally abuse me. He would then buy me things or give me money to make it all better. Unfortunately, I didn't know any better and had a very poor self-esteem. His money took me away from my poor home life, and that's why I ended up staying with him for 5 years. The incident happened when I was 17. James and his brother Victor bought a house in a really nice neighborhood. Victor was a single guy, the player type, and he had another one of his random girls over that night. It was around midnight and James and I headed to bed. Victor and the girl left and had borrowed James's car. Now, only James and I were alone in the house. About 2 minutes after they left, we heard a knock at the door. James says Victor must have forgotten his keys, so he gets up and heads to the door. I'm still lying in bed when I hear James say, "You have the wrong house and you need to leave right now." He comes running into the room, telling me to close the door as I hear the front door getting kicked in and then see 2 men enter the house. One was wearing a bandana over his face and the other guy wasn't even trying to hide his identity. But I didn't recognize him. We thought they must be here for drugs and money. We had no weapons on us and the money and drugs were in a separate bedroom. They started kicking down the bedroom door as we did our best to hold our weight against it. We were screaming and begging for them to leave. At one point, the bandana guy got his arm and leg through the door. I made eye contact with him and then there was a loud bang as he dropped a gun. As I reached for it, he had backed off a little bit and the other guy quickly picked it up. Maybe it was out of fear that I couldn't recognize the man without a mask, but I felt something in the stare he gave me. James was on the phone with the police the whole time this was happening. Then, as suddenly as it started, it had ended. The guys had taken off. It was now time to check what they took and to hide the drugs. Shortly after, the police showed up. They found a bullet hole in the wall of the room directly beside the room we were in. I found out later it was because bandana guy hit the gun out of the other guy's hand as he tried to shoot me through the door. Also, we discovered the 2 intruders didn't take anything. It wasn't a robbery at all. In fact, they were there to give someone a very brutal beating. I went home the next day completely traumatized, not wanting to tell my family anything that happened. As I walked through the door, my grandmother confronted me about the home invasion. I thought at the time one of the 2 must have known someone in my family, since my grandmother said one of my female cousins had told her. Later, I get a call from my cousin Anthony's wife. I picked up and she said, "Anthony wants to say sorry, but you weren't supposed to be there." Anthony and I are the same age and grew up extremely close. He first got locked up at the age of 13, and he and I would write to each other all the time. There was a very strong bond between us. At the time of the phone call, I was dumb and assumed that someone in the seedy underworld of gangs and drugs told them. I was naive and convinced that the home invasion was a rival drug dealer, but that wasn't the case at all. Paranoia had set in and we spent weeks waiting for them to come back. James made sure he always had a few scary guys with guns at the house. A few months after this happened, I was reading through the newspaper when I see a photo of my cousin Anthony and another guy in the most wanted section. The other guy looked vaguely familiar. Then, out of the blue, the phone rang, and it was a girl named Carly. She was completely in love with Victor, but he treated her like crap. She brings up the mugshots in the newspaper and says, "That's your cousin, right?" Then came the bombshell. She confessed to me that the home invasion was because of her. The other guy in the mugshot liked her, and she would tell him how Victor would slap her around and had forced her to get an abortion. My cousin Anthony was this guy's friend, and they made her tell them where Victor lived. That night, they had been watching the house and saw two people leave in James's car. It was dark, and they thought it was James and I that had left. She began apologizing profusely, begging me not to tell James, and I didn't. I knew if I told him, he would have her killed. Also, because Anthony was involved, I assumed I would have to show James's thugs where my cousin lived. Regardless of what he did, I'm stupidly loyal to my family. I saw Anthony at a family function a few years later. He said sorry and that he loved me and that it wasn't his fault. That was 13 years ago, and my life is completely different now. I'm an upstanding member of society, but still feel a lump in my throat when I talk about it. Number 2. This story took place a few weeks ago. The night started off like any other. Normally, I would be either hanging out with friends or staying in and watching TV. Either way, I was up later than I should have been. It was during winter break, so it wasn't like I had to worry about getting up for school or anything. I should also note that I'm a 19-year-old male of average size, so I don't get spooked easily. It was around 4:30 in the morning. My dad had just left for work, and my brother, who's also 19, and mother were both still sleeping. I was thirsty, so I headed downstairs to get a glass of water. As I walked by the front door, I noticed something strange. The front door was unlocked. I figured my dad had probably been in a rush and had just forgotten to lock it. I locked the door and thought nothing else of it. I continued on into the kitchen and was about to turn on the lights when I noticed a figure standing in the corner. At first, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me, I took a step closer. But as my eyes adjusted, my heart sank. There was definitely a person standing in the corner with their back to me. My mind started racing. From what I could tell, it looked to be an older male just standing perfectly still in the dark with his back towards me. I could hear him quietly humming to himself. When my mind finally processed all of this, I slowly turned around and walked out of the kitchen. At this point, I didn't know what options I had. I was the only one up. I walked back upstairs into my room and woke my brother up. At first, he didn't believe me. He thought I was just messing with him, but then knew I was dead serious from the look on my face. We figured our best option was to go downstairs and confront him. We armed ourselves with a belt and an old baseball bat from the closet and began mentally preparing for what we were about to do. Then, out of nowhere, we heard him sprinting down the hallway and out the front door. My mom woke up to this, thinking it was either me or my brother making all the racket. She came out of her room to see what was going on. My brother and I were already downstairs seeing if anything was taken or broken. On first glance, nothing looked out of place. We locked the front door and went room to room, making sure no one else was in the house. It wasn't until morning that we had realized that one of our big knives was missing. After all of this time, I still don't know what the man wanted. Did he want to hurt us? Was he insane? Was he on drugs? Something else that bothers me is I don't know how he got in, because my dad had said he'd locked the door when he left. Anyways, it's been a few weeks since this happened, and nothing has happened since. But to the man who broke into my house, let's not meet again. Number 3. This happened when I was around 5 to 6 years old. My mom wasn't the best mom in the world by any means. She had her fair share of faults and struggles. One of the many things I had grown accustomed to was staying home alone while she worked or went out partying. Most of the time, my older siblings were told to look after me. Sometimes they would, but most of the time they'd leave to hang out with their friends. I didn't mind it, to be honest. I like being home alone, and at that age, I didn't understand the danger of it. Until this happened. It was around 5 p.m. and my mom had gone out and my siblings were off doing their own things, so I was left home alone. I was to follow the usual protocol. Don't open the door to strangers, don't leave the house, so on and so forth. We didn't live in the best neighborhood, but it wasn't the worst. I felt pretty safe because nothing had ever happened to me while I was home alone, and I thought nothing ever would. At that age, I didn't see anything to be afraid of. Also, we didn't have a home phone if anything did happen. My mom was providing for far too many children and had a low income. She was paid under the table, so we were often without a phone, a TV, and sometimes electricity. The night started pretty normal. I made dinner and watched VHS after VHS tape and listened to music. I was a pretty responsible child and didn't leave the house at all. I knew my mom or one of my siblings would be home by 9 to 10 p.m., so there really wasn't much to worry about. The entrance to our apartment was in the back. There was a basic, shitty screen door, and then a dead-bolted locked main door. Once you entered through there, you would go up long, narrow, steep steps which entered into a small hallway. To the right of the hallway was the living room, which also had a balcony and a screen door. To the left was the bathroom and my mom's room. We also had a kitchen and dining room. Adjacent to the kitchen was mine and my siblings' bedroom. I was sitting in the living room for the majority of the night. The balcony door and main doors were locked, even though the balcony door didn't really matter since there was a huge hole in the screen. Anyways, I started to hear banging on the main door, and that was enough to startle me. I sat there in silence, knowing better than to answer. I hoped that maybe it was one of our neighbors and they'd leave after no response. Nope, it continued. Loud, angry bangs, like you'd hear from the police. I quite literally was frozen with fear. I was always told to be safe, stay away from strangers, and to never answer the door. But it wasn't until that moment that I realized what true fear felt like and why I was warned of those things. The banging continued, one right after the other, along with unintelligible yelling, coming from what sounded like a man. I knew that all that was separating us was the main door. It wasn't sturdy and needed to be replaced, so I knew the chances of the man getting inside the apartment were high. I was always told to hide in these situations, so I turned off the TV and decided I was going to hide in my bedroom closet. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and ran to the closet as quick as possible. I turned off all the lights, closed the closet door, and hid behind a bunch of boxes. It felt like an eternity. The bangs would stop for a moment or two, and I'd think I was in the clear. Then they'd come back, even louder than before. It sounded like someone was using their foot to knock as opposed to their hand. Then, to my horror, I realized that sound was their body slamming against the door. My heart was beating so loud, I could barely hear anything else. I knew the door was as good as gone after the last blow to it. The sound of the door breaking echoed throughout the apartment. I then heard slow, heavy footsteps start up the stairs. All I could do was wait and listen, and hope this person didn't find me. He began yelling for my mom, telling her to get out there and talk to him. I still couldn't place the voice. My mom had way too many boyfriends for me to ever really keep track, so I assumed this was one of her many flings, coming back for a fight. The man began throwing things angrily, still yelling for my mom to come out. I wasn't sure what room he was in exactly, but I figured he was soon going to be trashing the rest of the apartment. Then I heard him in the kitchen, rummaging through drawers, throwing things against the wall, and dishes breaking. At this point, I began to cry. I never knew what it was like to fear death until that moment. I could hear the loud steps of him entering the bedroom, and then saw the light turned on from underneath the closet door. With my hand over my mouth, sobbing and going into a panic attack, I tried not to move a muscle. Then I heard another set of footsteps coming up the stairs. These steps were much quicker and lighter. I then heard my name called from one of my brothers, but I still didn't make a peep. I'm not sure what happened next, but I assumed that the intruder and my brother fought it out. I thought my brother was going to die, honestly. He's very short and there isn't much to him. I thought for sure the man was going to kill him, and I was going to be next. I didn't see any of it as I remained in the closet the whole time. I did what I was always taught to do. After what felt like hours, I heard the heavy footsteps go down the stairs, followed by a bang. I'm not sure what the bang was. Maybe him attempting to close the now broken door, or maybe kicking or punching it. A few more minutes passed before my brother called out my name. I began wailing at the top of my lungs. My brother found me in the closet. His nose and lips were all bloody, and I could tell he'd soon have a black eye. He picked me up and told me we were safe. I had never felt such relief in my life. My mom got home not long after, and when she saw and heard what happened, she lost her shit. It's safe to say a lot of hugs were shared, tears were shed, and apologies given. That wasn't the end of it, though. The next morning was a school day. We got up early and ate breakfast, but when it was time to leave, we couldn't. The front door had been jammed in a place on purpose, and the knobs were missing. We quite literally were stuck. Everyone panicked because we didn't know what to do, and we couldn't call anyone. My brothers attempted to get it open, but it wouldn't budge. I thought it was cool because I didn't want to go to school anyways, and I didn't really understand the situation. I just thought the door jammed by itself. Eventually, we all ended up going out on the balcony. It wasn't that high, about 1 story up, and next to our balcony was a freezer, so we could all drop down onto that. My oldest brother told us to wait and climb down onto the freezer. He went into the shed and got a ladder. We ended up climbing down and finding the doorknobs next to the building. Around the time that school got out, 3 to 3:30ish, I decided to head over to my friends down the street to hang out. I didn't want to be home. I was still downright terrified. After a couple hours of fun at my friends, my sister came over saying that we had to get home. Mom's in trouble and the cops were coming. I hopped on my bike and followed her home. When I thought of my mom being in trouble, I thought that meant she was going to jail. Boy, was I wrong. When we got there, my mom was on the front lawn yelling back and forth with one of her exes, the man who had broken in. I recognized his voice and was able to put 2 and 2 together. She yelled at me and my sister and told us to get upstairs and lock the door. But we didn't. We went out back and waited instead. Our brothers weren't home, so if anyone had to step in, it had to be us. Then I could hear him hitting her, saying he was going to kill us all when we least expected it. He was going to start with the youngest first, me, and then detailed how he was going to do it. How he was going to enjoy it and couldn't wait to see us all suffer. I watched as he hit her while she fought back, and then finally I heard sirens. The police came and arrested him, and shortly after we moved to a much safer location. I'm not sure what happened to him. He might still be in jail, in town, somewhere else in this world, or hopefully dead. I know now that when the door was jammed and the knobs removed, he was planning to get into the apartment by the balcony and set it aflame. So, to the man who wanted and tried to kill my whole family, let's never, ever meet again. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time.